Welcome to the Rethink and Return podcast. My name is Jason Shepard. Every week, we rethink things and return to God's original intention and His design. We generally do 2 recordings a week. One, we revisit a passage of Scripture that thousands of people are studying together in a Sunday gathering or in a house church, and we're just going to dig more deeply into these things that we didn't get to talk about enough or want to talk about more that we're wrestling with. And then we do another recording where we're just working out leadership things, being a pastor and ministry or leading stuff, and wrestling with tensions of how we live like that in our world today. So we'd love for you to like this, subscribe to it, share it with other people. Enjoy the podcast. We'll see you soon. Hey, thanks for joining us on the Rethink and Return podcast. We have a couple of conversations a week. One, we spend some time breaking down a passage of Scripture that thousands of people in a room have walked through together, and then in house churches throughout our city. And then we have a topic of leadership really aimed at people who are leading in the church world, but maybe you'll get something out of it if you're not. And I always have a friend come and join me, people that I love, that I've led with, that we get to know. And this is my friend, Matt Rule. Howdy, Matt.
Hello. Good to be here.
Thanks for coming. Thanks for hanging out. You and I, we've known each other for, I don't know. How
Going
many
on
years?
10 years now.
Is it a decade?
Almost.
Wow, dude, you're getting old, man. So I think I am too. And so it's been cool because Matt and I got to know each other while I was doing what I did and you were doing something else. And now we really get to serve a lot together. And I've seen you through different seasons of leadership, and you've seen me in different seasons of leadership. And so really, both of us have been serving in the church world to some degree for decades. And the topic today I'm talking about is longevity in leadership.
Yeah.
And longevity in leadership is really hard to find. And so, yeah, you've stayed now at a church that you planted. How many years ago?
Yeah. So we're 8 years into the church project that we planted, and it's been, it's been a journey. There's been times in that were beautiful and times that were hard.
Yeah.
So the longevity, the being able to stick with it and see the fruitfulness and see things that finally come to fruition that you'd never get to if you didn't stick with it.
So you started Church Project and you've stayed a while. How long ago did you start?
Yeah, so we started 8 years ago. It's been 8 years now since we planted Church Project.
Yeah, that's a long time. The average stay for a pastor in America is less than 2 years.
Wow.
There's a lot of averages out there, right? And so the average church size now is 67, 80% of churches have less than 200 people in them. There's all these stats. The most astounding stat for me is how quickly a pastor leaves a church. Now, we have some people who stay 20 and 30 years. So if you get down to the average of 2 years or less, that means there are people who they leave quickly. I like to say starting is hard, staying is harder. And so both of us have started something and we've stayed. So we know both seasons. And at some point, I'll have a podcast where we talk about starting something.
Yeah.
Starting is really hard.
It is.
There's different levels, I think, of starting that are hard, right? Some people start from a true zero, like I moved to a town, I didn't know anybody, had no resources. And then some people started at 2 or 3. I have a spectrum of starting. I started maybe at a 3, you maybe started at a 5. Some people start like fully with a whole camp. It's barely a church start because it started as a church.
Yeah.
So you started, we're going to talk about starting at some point, but you've stayed and I've stayed. And I like to say starting is hard, staying is harder.
Yeah.
Have you found that to be true?
Oh, for sure. And some of the staying being harder for us was that we had a great start. And so, then the way we planted, and again, that may be more conversation for something else, but I think having a good start helps you stay. Yeah. And I think if you fumble the start, it makes staying even more difficult. Yeah. So for us, having a solid start really set us up in a lot of ways to begin a journey that was more sustainable, I think. Yeah. But staying, it's a choice.
Yeah.
Staying was often something that we just had to keep coming. For me, I had to keep coming back to. I'm called to this. This is what I'm supposed to do with my life. And it's, I think that's a big piece of it, is that this isn't just something I chose to do. It's something I feel like I'm supposed to be doing.
Yeah. I've almost not stayed a couple of times. I have I once really clearly told our elders, I said, I think it's time. And then another time, I didn't want to stay.
Mm,
And one time, I mean, the first time they were very wise and they said, we just think you're exhausted. And it was after a hard start.
yeah.
And that was, 5 or 6 years. And I didn't think I could stay.
Mm,
And they recognized that I was exhausted. And so they, forced a rest on me. I mean, I didn't resist it, but they would have had to force me if I did.
yeah.
I didn't ask for it or know I needed it or want it, but I was exhausted. I think some people can't stay because they're exhausted and they can't rest
Yeah.
or they don't rest.
Yeah.
So, I mean, have you seen that?
I've seen that. I've experienced that.
Yeah.
And some of it just from learning from others who have, on both sides, they've done it well and rested well. And some who, to your point, didn't. And then it didn't. But for you, like, how would you say rest as a principle has kind of led to longevity for you? I mean,
Yeah.
how's that principle worked out for
Yeah.
you?
Well, I mean, that's a great question that I think people have to figure out how to stay.
Mm.
And I think one of the only ways you can stay is if you figure out how to rest.
Mm-hmm.
And so I have rhythms daily, weekly, monthly, and annually that I rest in. What I didn't have was an annual rhythm of rest. And so, even whenever I talk about rest, I think about the skeptic or the critic who's like, well, I don't get to rest in my job. And I understand that. I don't think I work harder than a lot of people in the corporate world work. I just don't think I do. I mean, I work very hard, and I think they work very hard too. Most of my friends in the corporate world are really hard workers, but they would all agree, and those who know me understand, I deal with, and you deal with, we deal with more human pain than most people. And
Yeah.
every one of my friends' circles in the corporate world, they have pain in those circles and they have human issues in those circles. I just have a lot of circles
Sure.
and you have a lot of circles. And I think that is what requires a little bit of a unique approach to rest.
And I think a lot of pastors resist that rest for the sake of they just feel guilty about it, or they don't know how to steward that rest. Like they actually don't know how to rest.
Yeah.
And so is that, do you feel like rest is something that you had to learn how to embrace?
Totally.
What was that like for you?
Yeah. Well, again, I think, I wanted to leave. Our elders knew I was exhausted, body, soul, and spirit. They forced a rest on me that was a little longer than I thought was going to be healthy.
Mm.
And I hated it. But I knew at the end of that, I don't need to leave. I was exhausted, but it was just the beginning of me learning how to rest.
Yeah.
I did know how to rest daily. Like Mark 135, very early in the morning while it's still dark, Jesus gets up, goes off to a solitary place where he prays. But I knew how to do that. I knew how to take a day off every week. I mean, I got better and better at that. Like,
Sure.
no, this is my day with me, my wife, whatever. But in a little bit of an extended rest that I think is one of the reasons why I've been able to stay. One of the however many reasons I'm able to stay and others are able to stay. I've had to learn how to do it. And it actually took years.
Yeah.
Resting itself, I think just rest itself, even if you don't do it good, is a good thing.
Yeah.
But then learning how to rest well is crucial.
Can we press into that a little bit on this extended annual rest? What does that look like?
Yeah. Well, I met there's a dude I knew. He's actually out of ministry now, but I ran into him in California at this event, and he had been a pastor for a long time, really well known. And now I don't even think he would say he's a follower of Jesus. It's wild.
Mm.
But I met him at the end of a long sabbatical. And I said, hey, how's it going? And he said, well, I'm finishing up a sabbatical. I'm like, great. How's it been? He's like, not good. He said, I'm going to ask them for another one back to back. And I said, well, he said, Jason, your first month, you're just angry. Like all the pain that you've absorbed,
Yeah.
that people have inflicted on you or you've walked through with them, like it just needs to get out of you.
Yeah.
He said, so for a month, I just found myself angry because I had endured a lot of pain, both people inflicted on me or I walked through their pain with them. And he said, and after I got that out, I was able to rest. And then after I got that out, I was able to dream
Mm,
and think about the future. And so he said like month 1, month 2, and 3, and I'm like, man, I don't want to be waiting every however many years.
right.
You know, a lot of people wait to become healthy every 7 years or something for some sabbatical. I cannot understand that. I'm sure for some
Too little,
people
too late.
they could argue, but I'm like, man, what's a rhythm? I like a healthy rhythm. Like that's why I have a daily, a weekly, a monthly, and an annual rhythm. So my annual rhythm has become, I'm going to take a week and I'm just going to try to decompress. I've learned how, okay, that's how this pain is affecting me,
Yeah.
right? And so I've learned how to have that first week. Like I've sort of designed it now. Like I know for me what's best.
Mm,
I know what I need to be doing with
mm,
my wife, where I need to be doing it, to where that pain that is real, it's really there.
mm.
Like people have it caused me pain, and I've walked through a lot of pain with people. And plus, as Paul said, I face daily the pressure of concern for the churches. Like
Right.
this sense of that, like it's real. And so for me, I've instead of taking these 3 months, I have really looked at it in almost these 3 weeks. My first week is this pain's got to get out. And then the second week is I find myself really resting,
Yeah.
I mean, sometimes I'm bored. Like I don't know what to do. And I don't like being bored, but I'm resting. And so I found some things to do that I like, working with my hands on my tractor, on my land or whatever. And then the end of this, I'm finding I'm really, I can't wait to get back.
Mm,
But my first year, I didn't know how to do that. And I didn't want to go back because I was aware of the pain that I was stepping back into.
yeah. Yeah. So rest, obviously, in this way has been a significant part of longevity, but it's not the only thing.
Yeah.
What are some other things for you that you would say have contributed to just being here still?
Yeah. Well, I think, you alluded to it earlier, and you're really, really good at this, Matt. Like, you're really clear on your calling. And
Mm.
like, if somebody knows you, they know, man, this guy, he's made for this, right? And I think people know that and affirm that in you and your
Mm.
ministry. It's clear that this is what you're called to do, but you remind yourself of that too. And I remind myself, and every once in a while, Brooke has to remind me, hey, this is what God's calls you to do, at least for now, and until He tells you otherwise. And it doesn't seem like you will, but this is what I'm called to do.
Yeah, it's just the conviction, really, of
Mhm.
knowing that I think this is why I'm on the planet. I mean,
Mm.
there are other pieces to my life and what I do, and yet it's also interwoven with calling.
Yeah.
How I am at home with my wife and my kids, and how I am with my neighbors. It's all part of that calling, but it's a conviction that
Yeah.
this is what I'm supposed to give my life to, and it's different for me than it is for other people that maybe they're called to different things. But
Mhm.
having that, I think, just deeply settled in your own soul. This
Mhm.
wasn't just a good idea. It wasn't something that I just sort of got thrust into, but
Yeah.
I I feel like this is what I'm supposed to do.
Yeah. I mean, I think about starting something. I could have started and then left and almost did. And then one other time I'm like, I don't know that I want to give what it's going to cost me
Mm,
and my family. Uh, I don't know that I want to give that. And frankly, here I deal with painful things less than other people. Like we don't deal with institutional, organizational pain because
sure.
we're decentralized. We've distributed leadership. It's not all on my shoulders. We have an army of people that are leading out here together,
Mm,
living in decentralized community. I mean, it's so beautiful how we're doing it. I think that a lot of people leave where they are. And again, part of it for me was the starting exhaustion. I needed a break from that.
sure.
And then the COVID season was super painful for not just me, for everybody. That was the other time I'm like, I don't want to give this. But it was a unique season. And I don't think it'll ever happen again, knock on wood. But I think a lot of people end up leaving because the institutionalization that they're a
Mm,
part of, this
yeah.
organizational milieu that is most churches, they know they can't change that.
Mm,
Like they can't fight against it. Like I would have left ministry had I been in that kind of institutional, organizational
Right.
kind of church before. And the way we operate now is so different. I do think some of the leaving that we're seeing happen at record historical rates
Yeah.
is because the the fabric of the institution where most people are serving, it is just squeezed life out of people.
Yeah.
And I think that's part of what I've seen with some of my friends and people that I've respected and learned from. I think they've left because they're like, I don't want to give my life to this kind of thing anymore.
Yeah. I don't know how many friends, countless friends, too many that have left ministry. They love Jesus, they love his church, but they feel like they have had to spend their entire life fighting the very structures
Yeah.
they're working under in order to live out the calling that
Totally.
like to actually do what they want to do and feel like they're supposed to do.
Yeah.
And so having a sustainable, a healthy structure
Yeah.
actually lends to longevity.
Yeah. Totally agree with you. I mean, man, I sometimes I drive by buildings of other churches like in another town or whatever, and I start to feel like anxious or sick. Sometimes I'm like, I just think, thank God I'm not in that kind of structure anymore. And I think that there are people who are in it and they don't understand that there's a different way.
Sure.
But I've experienced that and you've experienced that. So I think part of longevity in leadership is the structure in which you're operating.
Yeah.
It may just be sucking the life out of you. Part of the longevity in leadership for me is also learning how to rest.
Mm.
So those are two things we talk about. And then the other thing was just knowing this is what I'm called to do.
Yeah.
I'll say another thing that I think has kept me in leadership a little bit longer is I think at some point you start to see dividends, like ROI starts coming in.
Yeah.
Like at some point in life, and whether it be financial investing that I've done or investing in my marriage or investing in my family, but when you start to see the investments of like decades of what you've done
Right.
start to come back, like we've created a new system here, or hopefully returned to an old system,
Right.
recovered that, bringing it back, practicing it, and sticking with it for a while. Then you start to see things now are easier. Culture, team, people who serve. Like we have things that are easier now than it used to be. I think I heard a pastor say one time, you cannot sustain the speed at which you start. I completely agree with that. But at some point when you get past startup and you get past, hey, we're sustainable, then you go, okay, I'm starting to enjoy some things now that I always hoped I would enjoy.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Absolutely. I mean, even just 8 years in, I know you guys are 15 years into Church Project here. And I mean, in 8 years, we have seen the multiplication of healthy house churches
Yeah.
to the second, third, fourth generation.
Right.
And there are people who are, they are excited. They're as excited because it's day one for them
Yeah.
of what they're stepping into, and they're experiencing something beautiful. And that fuels me.
Yeah.
Like I feel a fresh excitement whenever I see
Yeah.
how happy they are to be
Mhm.
able to be a part of and step into this thing.
Yeah, I mean, we go from when you start something, it's this idea here that you want to put into reality. And then when you get that into reality, and then it starts to self-perpetuate.
Yeah.
Like it starts to multiply. Like other people get it.
Yeah.
They share the same convictions. Like the part of the longevity for me has been that this has become a culture. So it's well beyond me.
Mm-hmm.
And I think part of my angst for many years was, hey, if I left today, this wouldn't continue because it's not in enough people yet. They don't fully get it yet.
Yeah.
And we're going to have a whole episode on culture at some point. But for me, culture is what everyone always does.
Right.
And culture, you have a strong culture when the founder or the leader could leave or try to change it and things would continue. Like if I tried to change our culture, like they'd run me off.
Right.
And if I try to change the things that make us who we are, the organism is so strong,
Right.
like it's stronger than the host, to speak in biological terms. And so I think for me, that has caused me that has created such a peace in me
Sure.
about being here. Like I'm not having to fight for its existence anymore, as I'm now just enjoying being a participant in it.
I've heard you say this before, and it stuck with me that every significant change in direction or culture is an admission of ignorance. Like we didn't know what we were doing, so now we're going to change it.
Yeah.
And I think what you're speaking to there is when you just you have the right thing and you trust it and you stick with it and you just keep doing the same thing year after year, you start to see the return on that and the culture that that produces that actually begins to feed it. You look up and you're not the only one pushing anymore.
Yeah. I think one of the reasons why people leave where they are is because it's all on them.
Mm.
And that's too hard.
Mm.
And to have it all on you for a while when you're starting or you're trying to change something, you're trying to change a culture or institute a culture, you get it. Hey, I'm here to be a change agent in a culture, or I'm here to start a culture. But when you have to sustain it and it's not culture,
Yeah.
it's only on you.
Yeah.
That's exhausting. And I think there are a lot of guys that I know, a lot of men and women I know, a lot of leaders I know that they're in a place and they have a vision and they know what needs to happen, but it's only in their mind or a couple people's mind, and it hasn't yet become part of the culture.
Mm.
And part of the ability to stay is when whatever God's called you to do is part of the culture that you're leading in. And for me now, staying now, I can see what other aspects of this beautiful body what's next for us, rather than just trying to keep the same thing. Now I actually am in sort of the last week of my break, or that other guy month forward. Like now I can dream
Yeah.
about what might be next for our church in different areas, or how we can be used, because now the culture's set and strong.
Right. You're here now, but looking back to when you did feel like
Yeah.
it was all on you,
Mhm.
what kept you from giving up?
Yeah. No, I honestly, I think that is the crux of the question. It's a good question, and that I'd love to find the answer to that somehow, right? And for people, because I think that God's beautifully gifted and called and equipped so many people, and they live with these deep convictions, but it takes something takes the life out of them and they just quit.
Mm.
And the rest of their life, they're going, man, I wish I would have stayed.
Yeah.
Uh, I think for me, I didn't give up
Mm.
because I had lived with a conviction so deep, and it got so much clarity that I had it and I couldn't live without it.
Mm.
And I wanted to share it with other people. I have a few thoughts on this, but one, I think that some people start out too quickly to go after what is in their heart. And I think God wants us this conviction to build clarity and build conviction over a period of time.
Mm-hmm.
And at some point, it got clear enough for me that I had to do it. And then I think the other thing is I had to be willing. Well, I actually believed that not many people would be into this, and I had to be okay with that. It took me years to get okay with that, because I think some people are gauging their success by how many people are in this, and I think we have to be willing to go. It may take a long time
Mm.
for people to get this, or everyone may not get it.
Yeah.
There's an old Greek proverb that says, we're planting trees under whose shade we will not sit.
Mm-hmm.
And, it goes to Hebrews 11. Like it says that these people, God gave them a calling, but they didn't get to see the fulfillment of it.
Yeah.
And so I think for me, even now, to realize, even though some really beautiful things have happened through Church Project in a lot of places in here, I think for me to realize I'm not going to get to see the fulfillment completely of all my vision or all that's in my heart. I'm just a small part of it. I'm this part of it.
Yeah. And so there's a significant piece of this that, I mean, obviously we're the ones here. We're fighting for this. We believe in what God has led, us to do wherever we're at. But it's not all on us. Like there's this deep rooted dependence on, ultimately, this is Jesus building his church.
Yeah.
We're intimately and intricately involved in it,
Mhm.
right? But he's the one
Yeah.
doing the work.
Yeah. No, he is, but I mean, I really hurt for like there's this guy this week that I follow, I've known for a while. He planted a church and he was getting after it. He gave it everything he had.
Mm.
And after 10 years,
Wow.
he they closed down. They had their last Sunday a couple weeks ago.
Mm.
My heart just ached for this guy. I found out about somebody in our church that bought a church building
Oh,
like 2 miles from here. I'm like, this guy told me that. I'm like, what? I've never heard of this church. And I called it, they had an answering machine,
Mm.
and so I left a message on the answering machine, and I'm like, well, there's one of your problems and probably a lot of other problems. But I left a message for the guy. I'm like, hey, I don't know you. Just found out that your building got sold to a dude to make it a shop and man cave and all that. But I'm sure there's some not fun stuff going on.
yeah.
I'd love to have a conversation with you. And he called me back after he plus pray on the recorder. And, it was a painful thing.
Yeah.
And I think there are times where things need to close.
Sure.
I think there are times where people need to leave. But if something didn't need to close or somebody didn't need to leave, that's where I really care about people going, hey, what could have made it where you could have stayed if it was the right thing or you're the right person or if it was the right place and time. I'll say this. I think it has to be almost like a perfect storm for anything to even exist. I mean, God's got to be in it and it's got to be the right time and place and people. But, you know, starting is hard, staying is harder. I think part of the staying that's harder too, maybe the last thing we'll talk about on what makes staying hard is uh, if you don't figure out a way to reconcile
Mm.
all the pain
Mm.
that's been caused. I like to say, man, I could introduce two people together and they get married and I do their wedding and then they have a baby. And then, I go to the hospital and pray for the baby and then I do the funeral of the baby.
Yeah.
And then they get mad about something not long after that, what I don't know, and they're gone.
Yeah.
Like there's all kinds of pain and rejection and critics. While I have a ton of beauty, overwhelming amount of beauty, if 99% is beauty, but the 1%, if one out of 100 people, and you multiply that by hundreds or thousands, like this stuff at some point, you have to learn how to just give so much grace to people. I like to say, I'm going to give a lot more grace
Mm.
than I'm going to get from some people.
Mm.
And if I don't learn how to reconcile that, can't stay.
Yeah.
If I don't learn how to forgive people or be okay with somebody not loving me or
Yeah.
liking me, I mean that too, that can build up to a point where it can destroy your soul.
You're learning to care deeply without carrying the
Mhm.
weight or even the consequence,
Right.
right, of that. And so, I mean, is that something for you that, I mean, early on, did you feel like you were piling up hurt?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, nobody's used to getting hurt that much. I mean, we do one of our axioms here is we care, but we don't carry. Like we have to care deeply about what people are going through without carrying it. But to apply that to where people hurt me, that's somebody else's pain. But
Yeah.
no, I mean, nobody's really in a position to get hurt by as many people that you love as closely in community.
Mm.
As a pastor, I like to say, during the pandemic, I'm like, man, I'd hate to be a politician, a principal, or a pastor. But I mean, being a pastor is you're going to be in real relations with people
Yeah.
that people are going to hurt you to some degree. And that is really unique.
Mm.
It's really unique in our position. And that many people can hurt. And so, no, I don't think any of us who step into ministry of any kind or pastoral ministry, especially of any kind, know how to handle that.
Yeah.
And so for years, man, I built it up. I mean, I
Mm.
couldn't sleep. I wasn't happy at home. It bothered me. I didn't know how to handle this kind of amount of I don't think everybody in the world should like me. I mean, half the time I don't like me. But I mean, to have like people reject you repeatedly and not like you. I mean, every Sunday, every week, every something. I mean, we're getting rejected all the time. And I had to thank God, like we talked about last week, the sanctification of leadership. But
Mm.
God used all that to sanctify me and help me not please people, be more confident even in myself.
Mm.
But yeah, I mean, haven't we all had to learn how to let go of this rejection and pain? And if we don't, I don't think we can stay.
Yeah. I remember hearing you say this one time referencing Jesus on the cross. and his words being, Father, forgive them. They don't know what they're doing.
Yeah.
That people's hurt, often it's not intentional. They're just doing what they think is right
At that time.
at the moment, at
Yeah.
that time, and not realizing the damage. And so, I
Mhm.
mean, for you, how has the words that Jesus uttered, how has that become a part of your leadership in these moments like that?
I mean, that's the litmus. I mean, Jesus is the standard. And I think the apex of that was him on the cross,
Yeah.
Father, forgive them while they're nailing in his feet.
Wow.
In a sense, Father, forgive them. They don't know what they're doing.
Yeah.
And so properly, when we're like living, walking by the Spirit,
Mm.
fully submitted, you and I and whoever, all believers, especially, but maybe especially pastors in this moment, are going, I have to forgive them.
Mm.
They don't know what they're doing. They're not yet there. Like one of the soldiers at least was like, oh my, this was the Son of God.
Yeah.
But that was later. That was after he was nailing in, man. And so, it's really encouraging for me when people, and it's happened to me actually the last year or two, there have been some beautiful moments of people who this weekend actually, somebody who was intentionally hurtful,
Mm.
uh, came to me and apologized, and it was beautiful. It
Mm.
was healing, and it was great, and I loved it. And yeah,
But
but I
moments like that being only possible because you stayed. Like
well,
you
you're right.
long enough. Like that's the longevity part. Like that's
Yeah.
the return on investment.
Hmm.
That you stuck through it long enough for God to work in their heart
Yeah.
and then to come back around.
I mean, you're a lot nicer than me, and so you probably have a lot less thing that. I mean, everybody knows that you're the nicest guy around. But I mean, you've had to learn how to deal with pain too, right? And it maybe people have intentionally inflicted it upon you, or maybe just passively they have. But you've had to learn how to deal. I mean, what kind of pain have you had to learn how to deal with in order to stay?
Yeah, I mean, so there's the pain of um, building something that
Mhm.
is going to be beautiful and is going to be life-giving
Yeah.
and is going to be meaningful for people, and you work tirelessly, you lead a team to do it, and they refuse to engage with it,
Yeah.
and then complain about it and then move on.
Yeah, they're rejected.
Reject it.
It's painful.
It's painful, and in that there's just this kind of sense of I didn't do this for my sake, I did this for your sake.
Yeah.
And you're throwing it away,
Yeah. I mean, what we want for people that they choose to not have.
Yeah.
That's painful. Anything else you've had to learn to live with? Any other kind of pain?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the other significant things has just been people who have misunderstood hard decisions that we have to make as a leader.
Yeah.
Whether that's,
Totally.
We keep going back to pandemic things, but do we stay open? Do we not? What do
Right.
we do? How do we do it? Or even just staff. Hey, we hired this staff. We didn't hire this staff. We did these things.
Mm.
And people who don't have all the information,
Mm-hmm.
but with limited knowledge with short-term knowledge make
Yeah.
long-term decisions.
Yeah. Yeah.
And just understanding like how much they're missing out and how much that hurts, that I can't explain everything to you,
Mm-hmm.
but if I could, you'd
Yeah.
understand that.
Yeah. Or at least trust that we used all the best practice we knew at the time.
Yeah.
To make the best decision. So we're talking about, longevity and leadership, how we stay. So we've talked about rest. We've talked about learning how to forgive people.
Yeah.
What else have we
We're
talked about?
talking about this having a structure that's
That's it.
sustainable for longevity.
That's right. I mean, a lot of structures, I will admit, suck the life out of people.
Yeah.
And did and would have fully sucked the life out of me.
Yeah.
So structure, rest, learning how to forgive people,
Yeah.
calling,
Absolutely.
knowing I got it. I know I'm called to this. Anything else that we talked about?
Those are the big things. And I think like having kind of an understanding and holding those things, and even regularly like having conversations about it. I mean,
Yeah.
that's what keeping it in front of you.
Yeah. I will say another thing that's kept me in the game, undoubtedly, has been like leaders above me
Mm.
that have had freedom and expectation and accountability to speak into my life. So we have our elders who I'm one of, and I lead with them. But then I also have these mentors over here who, and they can speak freely and fully into my life, our elders do, and they do, into my life, the life of our church. I have a unique role among the elders. We all know that, but I have a plurality here. But I also have these mentors. They're all about 20 years older than me. Literally, they're all like exactly 20 years older than me, which
Wow.
is really weird. 3 of the 4 are, and one is 23 or 24 years older than me. And I've been meeting with them for 15 or 20 years.
Wow.
And I meet with them once a month, so every week, and I do with our elders too. So every week, I'm having a lunch or with one of my mentors and with one of our elders. That's kept me in the game. I mean, early on, I laid across the lunch table, and I'm like, I can't keep going. And these guys kept me there. In fact, at our 15th anniversary, one of my mentors, his name is Armand. Armand, he and I had lunch the week after our 15 years, and he said, Jason, I watched it with tears in my eyes because I remembered years in where I didn't think you were going to make it, and you didn't think you were going to make it, but you did. And I haven't done this alone.
Yeah.
And having people to speak into my life, to hold my arms up, to encourage me, to give me counsel, that has kept me in the game. I think a lot of guys are alone, man.
Yeah.
And I've had to seek that out, and they've had to be willing to give it back too. But yeah,
Well, that was my question, because I think a lot of guys are waiting for just that mentor to sort of seek them out.
Yeah.
Like nobody magically dropped into your world. You had
No.
to pursue them.
That's right.
Like, what was that like?
That's a great question. Yeah, I mean, I think in my idealism, I would think, hey, somebody in our church or somebody in our community has a sense of a calling to walk alongside me and help me. Surely they see something in me and they want to help me. But that for me is almost a fairy tale. It
Right.
rarely happens. So for me, I have intentionally had to look at opportunities to just go. I mean, this is a long time, 15 or 20 years ago, but just one time. I don't want to ask a guy to make a covenant of mentorship with me.
Sure.
But hey, can we have coffee or can we have lunch? And then, hey, can we do that again? And then if they're willing to, and I want them to, we set up like a monthly thing that has turned into something so clear that our my mentors would know our elders, and our elders are mentors, and would be able to speak with each other if they needed to about
Yeah.
whatever. If they're worried about me, concerned about something. And so I encourage guys, just find somebody that you feel connected to, you have a lot of respect for, and ask them to go to coffee one time and just say, hey, I need somebody to talk to. If that goes really well, ask them if they'll do it again 6 or 8 weeks later.
Yeah.
And if that goes well, see if you guys can set up, hey, could we do this every month or so? And I'm gonna get 12 on the calendar, and we may make 10. One's gonna be out of town, or somebody's gonna be sick or something. We can reschedule or miss it. But I think people need to go after that. I've had to set up a structure for myself in order to sustain my leadership. I set up a structure in a church, right? That we created the structure, which we believe we've seen in Scripture and recovered, returned to it. But also in my own personal life, I had to create a structure, not only my weekly schedule, but people to speak into my life. And I know you have some of that too.
Yeah. I mean, that's been over the years, but especially the last 8 years of planting. I mean, I have had, we have our own elders, same structure. We have a plurality there. And these, guys are speaking into my life. I meet with them monthly. But there have been three different men that I've continued to meet with, to your point, like on a monthly basis.
Yeah.
And most of our conversations it's really just them breathing some life back into me. And I can't imagine where I would be today if it wasn't for that.
Right. I mean, when I think of the guys that have helped keep me in the game, like Armand and Kyle and Larry and Jeff, these guys, they don't need anything from me, but they love me.
Yeah.
And, most of what I do, I mean, they're needing some counsel from me or some guidance from me or encouragement or correction, or whatever. But these guys, they just love me and they don't need anything from me. And I think every pastor who's going to stay in the game very long, you got to have that. I can't imagine. I wouldn't be here without that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What would you say to someone who feels like they're just isolated and on an island, that they're like, I don't even know who to ask. I don't know where to start. Well, how would you encourage them? Just take a step, find a mentor. What would that look like?
I think the place would be the hardest is if you're in a super small church.
Yeah.
You can't find it. But I would say go outside of that circle
Mm-hmm.
of your little bitty church
Mm-hmm.
and go find another pastor in town who's older than you, or find a business leader who's older than you. In fact, of those guys I mentioned, only one's a pastor. The other three are business guys.
Yeah.
I just need a really godly guy who understands what God's called me to do
Yeah.
and who believes in me.
Yeah.
That's what I needed. Another guy named Lee has been that for me too. He's like 25 years older than me. I have needed some guys who are older than me, who see my calling and believe in me,
Mm.
and they want to support me. Like, so for me, that's been crucial. I would encourage any young leader, find somebody older than you who walking with the Lord, and they believe in you, and they're going to help you. Like these guys, I didn't want them to come to our church. You know what I'm saying? Like they don't.
Right.
I didn't want them to come here. It wasn't about that. It was, I need you to understand my calling and just speak into my life in any way.
Mm.
So I would tell somebody, they're in your city. There's some godly, older business person, leader in the community, somebody who believes in you and who wants to spend some time with you. And I would just saddle up next to that person.
Mm. That requires a lot of intentionality,
Yeah.
a little bit of humility.
Yeah.
But what I have found is that there's a lot of great people out there
Yeah.
that, to your point, they may not seek you out, but they're more than willing.
Yeah, I agree.
And so, I mean, something I've learned to do is never say no for someone else. Like, let everybody say their own no.
Yeah, yeah.
So assume that
Yeah.
they'd be interested.
Yeah, I think so. I think my proclivity is to think, man, I'm taking somebody's time. They don't want to spend time with me. They're too busy. And to some degree, that is true. But, what we're talking about, there are people who want it.
Mm.
So longevity, if you want to stay for a long time doing what God's called you to do, to the point that you can reap some dividends and enjoy it, you're enjoying what you do.
This is a beautiful season to see the fruit of that. I mean, I'm leading more than I've ever led, but I'm having more fun than I've ever had, which is beautiful.
Right?
Yeah.
It's unusual.
It is.
And it's beautiful. I like to tell people I'm not exhausted, I'm energized.
Yeah.
And but it's only because I stayed.
Mm.
Like you mentioned earlier, we stayed long enough to enjoy it. So if you want to stay long enough to enjoy something, you've got to figure out how to rest, how to deal with critics, how the structure you're in won't suck the life out of you, right? You've got to really clearly know your calling and make sure you're walking in that gifting and that calling.
Mm-hmm.
And I think you've got to have some mentors and leaders around you in your life who are outside of your immediate circle who will speak into your life.
Mm.
Anything else to add, Matt?
I mean, it's just those things are rich. And the only thing I would say is that it's really easy to forget those things.
Mm-hmm. That's right. That's good.
It's so easy to lose sight of them. And none of those are rocket science.
Yeah.
But if I don't keep them in front of me, if I don't have rhythms of those things, it'll easily fall off.
That's right.
And so I think just keeping it, guarding it.
Yeah.
It's just that is one of the most important leadership gifts that I can give to our church is me fighting for these things.
Yeah, that's good. And staying.
Yeah.
Yeah, us staying. I think I'm not old, but I'm not young. I mean, when I get in rooms now, a lot of the guys older than me are leaving.
Wow.
Like it seems like there's a 20-year gap between people. So I go in a room now and they're like, 25-year-old dudes and 30-year-old dudes, and I'm 51, but there's not too many people in the rooms older than me anymore. And so I'm really interested in seeing guys stay.
Mm.
And that's my hope. And that's my hope on this conversation is that you'll listen to something that a guy who stayed like Matt for, 8 years in one place and in ministry longer than that, and me 15 years in one place and ministry longer than that. These are the things that we're practicing and learning together, and we want you to stay.
Mm.
And we want you to enjoy the benefits of a long ministry. And there are other things that we could have added in here too, Matt. I mean, walking closely with Jesus, of course, purity in our life in every way. But I think at some point we'll dig deeply into just the character of a leader that we have to maintain. But these are some aspects of longevity and leadership now that I think are important. Matt, glad you're my friend. I love you a lot.
You too.
I love serving with you. I love watching your life. And I just enjoy being with you. Thanks for having this conversation with me.
Thanks for inviting me, and look forward to doing this for a long time still.
Absolutely. That's the plan, man.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks for watching this. See you later. Thanks for spending time with us today on the Rethink and Return podcast. Here's all we ask from you. Will you subscribe to this, share this, let other people know about it? That'll help us get the message out. Share this content with other people if it's helpful to you. We're grateful for you. See you soon.